Well. Good morning, everybody. I hope this stream is actually working, which is what I'll find out in a second. And let's hope it actually stays working and doesn't break off after 10 minutes, seconds. Here we go. Let's see. Okay, it is in fact working. That is good. Hello, everybody. I hope you have a good Friday. And it's actually, well, not Good Friday. That's still a couple of months to go. But I hope you have a productive Friday so far. Well, I did at least make tea, so I guess that counts as productivity already. Hey, Britton, how you doing today? How is your post Thanksgiving food coma going? I assume that's what everyone suffers from on Friday after Thanksgiving, right? I mean, hey, Kale, how you doing? Hello, also, how are you doing? Uh, let's hope the stream actually works. Last one on Tuesday, the stream just broke off after 45 seconds, and I had to restart it, which kind of sucked. But that's, I guess, StreamYard, not StreamYard, like Restream being less of a stable version of StreamYard at the moment. Yeah, I guess that's to be expected, Britain. I mean, it's late, and you had a full Thanksgiving. Did you have like a full on Thanksgiving party kind of thing with your family, or are you not the kind of celebrating household, Britain? And obviously for you, the same thing also. Although I imagine Thanksgiving having somewhat different connotations for you. I am back after the trip to see Jethro Tull, which was really interesting. I mean, I've seen Jethro Tull before, but it's always fascinating to see what kind of audience a band draws where you are. Last time I was in Athens, and it was a very mixed crowd. And in Germany on Wednesday, it was like very much old people. I was probably me and like my friends. We were there. We were probably among the youngest people at the concert, which is quite the experience, or something I don't necessarily have that often anymore. Hey, Apollo. I look mirrored. What do you mean by that? Anyway, yeah, the concert was fun. Like, musically, it's really good. Like, Jethro Tull still have it, or whatever band Ian Anderson is currently working with, which is not necessarily the original band members, because there's been like all kinds of changes over the years. Ian Anderson is still very, very active for someone who is 77 years old. He's still able to stand on one leg while playing the flute, so that's good. It was interesting in that Jethro Tull only plays seated venues these days, usually. So they play it was like a theater kind of place in Bremen, and so all seated, all old people. They played like two sets of like something like 50 minutes each, and then like a 15-minute break in the middle where everyone could get out, because it's a theater, so you have to go outside and drink your wine. Well, we didn't, but yeah. So, but musically it was really strong, really well done, and just nice to see them again. With those kind of old bands, it's always like, oh well, even if I may not be super excited at the moment, I'm like, well, it could be the last time I'll ever see them, so I'd better go. And in this case, it was worth it. Unfortunately, I wanted to buy it like they had like a red shirt with like a sort of like woodcut style print on it, and I wanted that, but they only had it in double XL, and that's like three sizes above what I usually wear. So three, four, whatever. I'm a medium guy, so I couldn't get that T-shirt, which is kind of sad because yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the thing, right, Apollo? It's like it really depends on the kind of concert you're going to, and Jethro Tull is sort of like proggy enough, and all of that stuff that it's I'm not as annoyed if I have to sit then at some other metal concerts where it's like some speed thrash metal concert and you force me to sit down. That's not gonna happen. That's just not the kind of thing you want. But with Jethro Tull, it kind of works. It was very cultured and very relaxed in that regard. Obviously, as I said, like the last time I saw them was in 2019 in Athens at the Herodion, which is a Roman amphitheater. So that had like a very special sort of like ambience and atmosphere if you sit in like right on the hillside of the Acropolis and on like an old Roman amphitheater kind of place and have Jethro Tull play. So yeah, I am fine with old people going to. I mean, the kind of concerts I usually go to are also usually what you might call old people, but not necessarily in their 70s, but more like in their 40s and 50s. Yeah, that's like I think that's sort of like the interesting thing with the kind with a lot of the concerts and lots of bands I enjoy is like when I started going to concerts, I used to be like one of the youngest people there. Now I'm very much sort of like in the average age for a lot of like rock and metal concerts in around here, which usually people somewhere between 30 and 50, I guess, is the range. And there's a few very young people, and I feel like in a couple of years I'll probably be among the oldest people going to those concerts. And there's still going to be like very few very young people because it's the kind of music that I feel a lot of people you either get into heavy metal and that kind of stuff in your when you're like in your teens and then you stick with it and grow old with it, or you kind of begin to appreciate some of the like more like older, more classic heavy metal and hard rock stuff. You kind of begin to appreciate when you're like in your 30s or 40s. So you have that main audience around that time. Obviously, that's also usually because people in their 30s usually have jobs and then possibly can afford, tickets, travel, all that stuff. Going to concerts is not exactly cheap if you think about it. And that's not necessarily something that, say, teenagers in high school can necessarily afford, at least on the larger scale, right? It's like when you look at, like, I think Iron Maiden's going on tour next year, and they have like ticket prices from around 100 euros per ticket, and that's not something you can necessarily afford if you're 16, right? So I guess it makes sense to see that sort of like the audience for these kind of events usually is mostly in their 30s or 40s. That's interesting. Like I was I was on that last Rush tour back in whenever that was. Must have been 2015-ish, I think. When they did the tour for Clockwork Angels. And there it was um, relatively mixed age-wise. I mean, that was 10 years ago. So, but maybe that was like a really big venue, and we had standing tickets like right up front at the stage, so there was like more younger people. Maybe the older audience was up there in the seats somewhere. That's possible. Um, like I don't know how much tickets for Taylor Swift cost. I don't even want to know. I suspect in a lot of ways. I mean, I think the interesting thing with heavy metal versus a lot of the way I encounter people that go to concerts like Taylor Swift, or a couple of years ago, I don't know, Lady Gaga, or whatever was like the big thing at the time. Usually people are fans of one specific artist and just go to that one show or one specific concert or whatever. So you can save up money for that. But usually with heavy metal and punk rock and those kind of music, I feel like a lot of times it's you go to every show you can get to. So it costs more in the long run to do that than saving up for one concert every 2 years or whenever it is that Taylor Swift goes on tour, right? For example. I think that might be part of it, and it's definitely, I guess, also often, the thing that you then want to go to, and you get maybe your parents' money, or your parents give it to you as like a birthday, Christmas, or whatever present, that kind of stuff, which is totally fine, right? I mean, there's always worse things to do with your money than spending it on a concert, no matter which concert, really. I mean, outside of Nazi bands, but that's a different thing, right? Yeah, but that I see. I'm obviously not a Taylor Swift fan either. But it's just not my kind of music. But I'd rather have people be engaged with artists, with music in some way or form than not at all. I mean, those kind of people that go like, well, I listen to music. It's like, what kind of music? Like, well, whatever's on the radio now. Like, well, whatever's on my Spotify mix playlist. And I'm like, that's I would never understand that. Going like, well, this is an artist I like, and I'm gonna follow them and figure out what they're doing, and I'm gonna wait for their new album until it drops and all of that. That's already good, no matter what kind of music you're listening to, right? It's the same thing as with books, right? I read specific kind of books, and that's the kind of books I really enjoy. But if you really, really, really dig romance novels, and you read a lot of romance, and you're excited about it, that's really cool. Engaging with art in any way or form that goes beyond just background consumption, I think, is already a step in the right direction if we want to, appreciate artists and of any kind of form, and appreciate art as something that is worthwhile for us as humans, and not just a product that is happening in the background. For that, being a Taylor Swift fan is just as valuable as being a supporter of your local underground hardcore scene. Now, there's places where I'd rather be than in a Taylor Swift concert, and that might be an underground hardcore show. But at least you're accepting that it is worth your money and your time, and that making art or making music or writing books is actually worthwhile, and not something you should do in your free time, and because it's a hobby and we don't need to pay people for it, we don't need to respect people for doing that kind of stuff. So that's already a step up, I think, in that regard. Now, are there problems with Taylor Swift? Yeah. Are there problems with a lot of heavy metal and underground music? Yes, of course, because it's humans doing stuff, and humans are messy. Hey Kat, how are you doing? I still haven't seen the movie Green Room. I know what it's about. I want to watch it, but for some reason, yeah, I managed to miss it when it was in theaters around here, and then I just haven't gotten to it. But I know what it is, and I suspect it's very good. See, I haven't even heard of Blue Ruin. So yeah, as I said, it was interesting. I enjoyed, in general, I enjoyed seeing Jethro Tull again, and it's always nice. And you know, um, I just realized I'm gonna go to a concert next Saturday, and that's kind of the thing that I also really appreciate about like the specific part of like the more underground side of heavy metal that I'm usually mostly part of. Obviously, also like punk rock and all kinds of other stuff, but this time it's like a friend of my flatmates. I also know them. They are organizing a small festival in Stuttgart. So my flatmate and me, and my old flatmate, and some friends of my flatmates from when he lived in a different city, and some other friends. We just like we rented an Airbnb and we're just all traveling there by train and hanging out there, supporting our friend with their concert and making a whole kind of sort of like fairly small kind of community kind of thing out of it. And I guess that's the advantage of being in a what you might call underground scene, in a very small, like numbers wise, relatively small scene of it's usually you go there for early, you meet a lot of people that you haven't seen for a while that may have traveled like from different countries just for that concert and stuff like that. And it's a very tight knit kind of community, and that's obviously something you can usually only get with these types of underground scenes, no matter the actual music or the actual kind of topic you congregate around, because as soon as it gets bigger, you just can't keep that sort of community y- uh, alive because you don't necessarily know everyone anymore. And it's like when I go to festivals, like in March, I'll hopefully go back to Athens to Up the Hammers festival. And it's like I probably know almost everyone who goes to that festival by now, and they probably know me. And that is like a very different experience from going to like a large concert where there's like 10,000 people coming to see Iron Maiden. Chances of meeting someone that you know are incredibly slim unless you already know that they're coming in advance. But if I go to, something like a small thing, there's going to be people there that I don't explicitly know will be there, but won't be surprised to meet them there, I guess. And that's certainly something that I appreciate about it. It's much more sort of like helping each other, more like DIY kind of attitude. And I always appreciate that because I think it's the stuff that keeps our society going if we actually, support each other on like a more like direct level in a lot of ways. So, yeah, shall we try to be productive for a while? I am currently rereading the Bible because why not? And I did finish the Pentateuch over the last 2 days, and now I'm somewhere in Joshua because, I figured to procrastinate further on the Mormonism video, I'd probably have to reread the Old Testament so I can make informed comments about how Joseph Smith twists some of the Bible stuff in his translations, inspired translations of the Bible, which he also wrote. And so that's what I'm doing now. So I'm learning a lot of interesting things or relearning things that I kind of forgot about it. So it's maybe I'm weird. Okay, so let's congregate again in 45 minutes, which would be 9:05. How does that sound? Right now, I am using a New King James version of the Bible, so it does not have the bonus stuff that us proper Catholics get. But the things like I have that, I've read that in German, but since I'm going to make the video on Mormonism in English, I felt having the like an English version would really help because otherwise, if I say something about Bible stuff, I always have to sort of translate it on the go in my head, and that's not as good as like actually knowing the words, I guess. But yeah, no apocryphas, no Maccabee, and none of the cool shit that us Catholics get. All right, good luck with the tea, Apollo. Hello, I am back, slightly delayed because I got distracted. All right, I hope you get tea. I made new tea and then I got distracted because turns out my flatmate woke up and we spent time talking about the Bible, which is, the kind of thing I do in the morning. Yeah, that makes sense that you have this separation with Irish and, on the other hand, Anglican theology. I mean, to be fair, Anglican is like actual high church Anglicanism is very close to Catholicism anyway, just, with the Queen, or in this case, the King, being boss hog and not the Pope. But like structurally, it's very close to Catholicism in a lot of ways, which is partly why you had like all those dissenters in the 17th century going, nah, that's not enough, and we need to, well, decapitate the king and institute different forms of, more radical forms of usually Calvinist influenced ideas, which is, understandable. So, yeah, how did you do? Obviously, I didn't do as much as I wanted to because, yeah, conversation. But I will still try to actually do writing in the second round because that's kind of the goal, isn't it? So, what else did I want to say? I did reread, or I did go through some emails and stuff, which is, helpful. Had to read a short essay by Neil Stephenson from his Substack because I'm subscribed to that for reasons. Probably because I like to disagree with him. Which says a lot, right? Like, technically, I've read like almost all Neil Stephenson novels, and I guess I could count as a fan in that regard, but it's usually because I disagree with him, which, it says a lot about like my relationship to authors, period. Yeah, definitely socially productive. That's true. Definitely socially productive in that regard. That is true. And yeah, I mean, also, that's like one of the things that I kind of that I really enjoy and appreciate about, like, not living alone, but always living with like flatmates. I've always lived in groups with like friends, and it does have that sort of bonus of sometimes just randomly ending up in the kitchen talking about whatever comes up and shit like that in a way that it's more dynamic than just living alone. I mean, I've lived alone for like a couple of years in between flatmates or whatever, but I prefer living with other people. It's just more fun. Oh no. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess physically is all they need from you, so that makes. I mean, it's not good, but what can you do? I'd better be physically ready to go to the gym in an hour, I guess. But mostly, yeah. As I said, the Neil Stephenson thing was interesting. Stephenson has discovered Peirce, that being Charles Sanders Peirce, and that's obviously a good thing, I guess. I was more shocked than that Stephenson in his essay said that he discovered him in 2021, where I'm like, wow. I thought you were aware of semiotics at this point. But maybe not. Maybe people can arrive at the same sort of ideas through different pathways. And he did not ever look into the whole like semiotics and how that kind of moved into postmodernism through people like Umberto Eco, and just ended up there by trying to be like Thomas Pynchon, whom I assume was aware of Peirce. But that's because Pynchon seems to be aware of just about everything. So yeah. Yeah, that's kind of the point. It's like it can get lonely, and especially if you kind of sometimes struggle with like mental health stuff. Just having people around that you can get aggravated at, or have fun conversations or whatever with, can be helpful, because it makes it harder to just like retreat into yourself and not communicate to anyone. Like, even, I mean, at that point, like when you're struggling with depression or whatever, even being angry at someone is already like a step up, I guess. And yeah, I guess I still need to figure out what to do and like what to read next. Obviously, the Bible thing will take forever, and that's good. But maybe by the end of me reading the Bible, I'll be actually done with recording the Mormonism video, and wouldn't that be fun? And then I can move on into just, oh right, next Tuesday, Lud Luda comes out by Jeff Noon and Steve Beard, so I can move, do like a quick reread of Gog Magog before that, and then move straight into Lud Luda on Tuesday. That would be really good. See, I'm making plans already. Also, I checked the poll for the winter holiday reading thing, and it still looks like Redwall is winning, which is, I'm fascinated by the fact that people willing to vote on my community tab poll are in fact kind-hearted enough to not make me suffer through Mordred's or any of the other things, but pick the one book series that I assume will be mostly wholesome and fun, and not not something to drive me mad. Or maybe everyone just really, really enjoys Redwall themselves and just wants to have like the nostalgia boost. I don't know. We'll find out. I have not read Walk Away by Cory Doctorow. I've obviously read stuff by Cory Doctorow before, but I haven't read that one yet. But I very much assume that I would love that one as well. That being, Cory Doctorow in general being someone I appreciate both with his fiction and his nonfiction work. Which, I mean, the whole like enshittification concept that he coined the phrase for, I think, is definitely a powerful one. I'm glad it has finally made its way sort of like into like larger discourse. And what's it called? Choke Point Capitalism is a really good one that he recently published 2 years ago. The man is way too busy. I wish I could be as productive as people like Cory Doctorow and people that are constantly writing stuff and constantly putting like their opinions out. And I very much struggle with that. And it's like, hey, I have all these thoughts, but like actually writing them down is kind of hard. Yeah, I'm sure I will read it sooner or later. It's more like keeping up with all these different people, and Cory Doctorow being, the kind of rebel that he is, which I very much appreciate, obviously only sells his books on his own like website and stuff. So you kind of have to actively look after the stuff and then acquire it through that means. I mean, I'm glad he doesn't participate, or he's like has enough integrity to not bow to like the demands of, say, Amazon and Audible or whatever. I get that, and it's really cool, but it does make it kind of harder, or not harder, but just like slightly more hassle to get the books, which, yeah, means I only do that from time to time when I remember to go to like Cory Doctorow's website and buy something. And right, I haven't done that in a while. I should probably. Well, I mean, that's the point. Is like it really depends on what kind of output you mean. Like, yes, I'm doing these videos at the moment, and that's certainly some form of output. And then there's always the idea of doing more. There's maybe some level of sort of imposter syndrome going on. Who knows? I mean, I feel like everyone who goes through academia kind of has a level of imposter syndrome or something adjacent to it to some degree. That's just like how this works. Um, and yeah, so I wish I had finished the Mormonism video like a month ago. That was like the plan. I mean, technically the plan was to do it in like in May or whatever, but you know, and of course I wish I would be more productive in that regard. But yeah, what you gonna do? Hey, you're back, Britton. How you doing? See, that's an interesting thing with utopias being hopeful. I don't know if you've read Frederick Jameson, Apollo. Recently passed away, like earlier this year, like summer, July, August, maybe. Which is obviously a great loss to philosophy and criticism and so forth. But then again, I mean, he was in his 90s, so it's not exactly surprising. And he wrote a couple of essays. I mean, he wrote Postmodernism or the Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, which is a really good collection of essays on postmodernism. And he has another essay collection called Utopia, A Desire Called Utopia and Other Science Fictions. I think that's the title, or Desire for Utopia. God, I always get it wrong. And what he points out is that utopias are often ironic in a lot of ways. I mean, he looks back at people like Thomas More with Nova Atlantis, and obviously Francis Bacon with Utopia, and how there's like a level of satire in Utopia that I think we often kind of miss when we talk about Utopia. Is like it's in the future and it's good, and dystopia is it's in the future and it's bad. And he tries to sort of like use like historical context to sort of explain why it is not just that, but has like a very clear political meanings, obviously, but is also very much a form of satire. All right, good luck with the bus, and good luck with work, Paulo. Um, I would say yes, Britain. There are. I know you're referring to the Cormac McCarthy thing. I assume. Um, I think I'm pretty sure there are very much well-adjusted great authors out there. I feel the idea of the tortured artist is one that comes up a lot, and I don't subscribe to it. I would argue that there are some forms of art, both in writing and in music and so forth, that require or that are easier to make if you are certainly not necessarily in the most comfortable, healthy state of mind, right? Like if you want to, it's hard to be a satisfied grown adult and make very angry radical art. You have to be sort of unhappy with something to create that kind of art. You have to have that rage or those extreme emotions at some point. But that's like very specific types of art, which is why why a lot of like bands are super angry when they're 15 or 16 and then become much more mellow when they grow older. And the same happens with writers. I would say a lot of writers, not all of them. Certainly, some people can keep that going, but there is a lot of like good art that was written or produced by fairly well-adjusted kind people. I mean, from all I know, Ursula Le Guin was a very fairly well-adjusted normal person, if you want to use normal here as a term, right? Obviously, I don't think normal is the correct way of stating that, but like someone who did not constantly do heinous shit, right? Ursula Le Guin definitely comes to mind. I still have to hear something bad about Thomas Pynchon, if we're talking about those like type of old white American authors, I guess. I think the problem is that authors or like artists oftentimes get more chances, opportunities to go overboard, because that I think is maybe part of it. Is like, if you're an artist, you create something. If you're a writer or a musician, you create art. It goes out there. You have a very often like a very cyclical kind of approach to this, right? You're slaving away in the content mines, and then you bring this thing out, and then you suddenly have this like big bust of like euphoria. You've done it, and then people ideally go and celebrate you or whatever, and then you drop back into having to come up with the next creative thing. And I feel that does sort of make it easier to fall into those kind of cyclical patterns of behavior where you do extremer things and then draw back and then do extreme things again. Plus, if you reach some level of fame, I guess there's just more opportunities to do these kind of things, right? I mean, if you're famous, obviously not very famous, but you know what I mean. You will meet people that have sort of parasocial attachments to you. You will be in situations where there is more just more opportunity to misbehave. And we see that with people with more famous YouTubers or social media people also get constantly getting canceled for shit because they get the chance to do dumb things where having not enough self-control can actually be translated into doing dumb shit, right? If I would not, even if I had those kind of urges or whatever, right? I don't have the opportunities to do these kind of things because yeah, I'm not famous. I'm not an artist. I'm not. I don't meet people that are have like large parasocial attachments to me or whatever. I don't get those opportunities. So I think there is the idea that all artists or famous artists are somewhat bad people or mentally unstable. I think in a lot of cases is more that the sort of lifestyle or the way you are forced to live your life if you are doing that kind of work as an artist, and the can make it easier to sort of end up in situations where you can do wrong, or that specific kind of wrong that we're usually talking about in these situations. Obviously everyone can do wrong all the time, but yeah, I mean the classic thing is like when you look to like 80s, 70s and 80s rock stars, and obviously every just about every musician, not every, but like most sort of like famous rock stars of the 70s and 80s did incredibly heinous stuff that would not fly today, and did a lot of like, especially when it comes to sexual conduct, a lot of stuff that is very far away from anything involving the rules, the idea of consent or anything of the sorts. And probably a lot of them also with people that have not reached an age of consent even, and stuff like that. It's like they should not have done this, obviously, don't get me wrong. Um, but it's very much also a situation of that the culture around that creates, right? You are probably on all kinds of drugs. You're incredibly famous. You have people coming to you all the time, and I don't even think it's I guess we usually talk about men in that regard, but there are interviews with people like the musicians from Girls School, for example, which was like a semi-famous US, not US, UK metal band, early new wave British heavy metal band, all women, and they also did certainly enjoy a rock star lifestyle, and I'm pretty sure age of consent is something that they also. Well, I mean, they were British, and I guess the age of consent was 14 at the time in the UK. So chances are they did not violate the law of the age of consent. But a lot of actual misbehavior comes from having the opportunity, having the situations, and oftentimes being in a situation where your frame of reference or moral frame of reference is already damaged by the situation that you are put into. So yes, you can be an artist that is well adjusted and normal, and does not do heinous shit. You can do that. They exist. It's just that we don't necessarily talk about them because the negative stuff is more there, and being an exposed or famous person makes it easier to do bad shit, I guess. No, don't get me wrong, as Britain. I'm not judging you for you not reading or for continuing to read or appreciate McCarthy in any way. I mean, art speaks to you or it doesn't, and the actual behavior of the person of the artist does not impact how art speaks to you. If you know stuff about it, it may mean that you don't ever even go close to it. But for you, that's too late. You have already read your McCarthy now. It was 14 in Germany for the longest time as well. I think it's 16 now. I haven't checked. I should probably know that by, but I think for the longest time it was 14 in Germany. In most parts of Europe, it was very much younger than in the US. There was, I think, once again, these obviously these things change over time, and I think there was a provision that obviously if you are in a position of power, it's illegal no matter, like, for example, teachers and students, or if you're a youth group leader, that kind of stuff. If you have a position of responsibility, then having a sexual relationship with someone under your care is definitely illegal and always was, no matter the age gap. And I think there was an age gap thing, like if you're over 21, then yes, the age of consent for the person that you're having a sexual encounter with is no longer 14, but 18, I think, something like that. So it was more like we have this whole idea that if you're under 18, you can obviously do whatever with other people under 18, because what you gonna do? Also, I don't know. It's no, seriously. In most parts of Europe, it was 14 and maybe 16, but that's age of consent in Europe. It's always been that way. I don't know if it's healthy or not. I mean, these are abstractions in a lot of ways, and I guess age of consent laws get broken all the time. It just usually doesn't come up because unless one person actually feels bad about it afterwards. But that's like the dark part with a lot of domestic abuse, violence, sexual abuse, all of that stuff is like, or what is legally that kind of stuff, right? It comes up and it becomes it only gets noticed if someone says something, because it happens in a domestic sphere where the law is usually not happening, not necessarily investigating. You need someone to speak out, and that's I guess the problem there. The most heinous thing I've done, I have no idea. I'm pretty sure I've done heinous things, but I mean, morally heinous. I don't think I've ever done anything really in that regard. I mean, certainly I've certainly punched people in the face, and I've certainly threatened people to punch people in the face, but I don't think that's heinous, right? I mean, that's not necessarily good behavior, and I try to not do that. But in that regard, no, I don't think I count as very heinous in that regard. Yeah, I think. I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert on or age of consent laws. I'm not interested in it that much, because I don't encounter on a regular basis people that are below the age of consent in any situation where I would even be tempted to you know have any interactions with them beyond just talking to them or whatever. Right? I'm not. I don't go. I don't live in those circles where that happens. I don't. So I don't pay attention to it that much. But there's certainly like a cultural thing going on where the US has always been more strict on these kind of things in some regard. But then again, you have child marriages there, so who's to say, right? Oh yeah, I've punched people as an adult, but not often. It was that kind of stuff. one situation was I was at a party and with my then girlfriend at the time, and there was this other dude, and he at some point they got very drunk together and started making out, and then she was came back to me. I was in a different part of the party, and then she came back to me, was crying, "Oh no, I did this with the other guy," and I'm like, "Okay, that's not exactly what I want to do. What I appreciate, it's you cheating on me and whatnot, and yeah, being incredibly drunk is not necessarily an excuse." And then the guy just walked over as if nothing happened, goes like, "Hey, how you doing? Why are you looking so sad?" And I'm like, at that point, I just lost it, just like smacked him right in the face, and yeah, what you gonna do? Certainly not a adult reaction, but certainly one that I can't necessarily fully condemn either. It's like, yeah, it would have been better to handle this in like a more mature way, but then again, I was 19 at the time and drunk. Yeah, I feel like giving up on an author is very difficult, on artists in general, especially if that art already means something to you. Like, will I deliberately seek out authors that I already know are bad? No. But something that already speaks to me, I can't erase those feelings. That's the point. No one can erase those feelings. Yes, you can sort of like cope and overcompensate by becoming really really mad about it, and I see that as certainly a reaction that people have, and I understand that. um, but beyond doing that performative on social media and whatnot, I don't know what's in your heart, but I'm pretty sure that those memories you had with an author, with a book, with music or whatever, those memories will still be there because they're part of who we are. They're part of our identity of like who we are over time. It's like I can't I can't unread a book. I can't unlisten to an album. Those things are in my history, and they have made me the person I am. That's just something I have to live with. That some of that is messy because human life is messy and human existence is messy, and I can try to do better. If I go back and reread some McCarthy, I'll certainly look at it from a different perspective, and that's something I've tried to say in the video that I made on it. Like, I think it's important for me. It's like the sexual stuff is fucked up. That's the illegal stuff. Obviously, he broke laws with that, and that's bad. Don't get me wrong. But what makes it difficult for me is that so much of her trauma, of Augusta Britt's trauma, and all the other fucked up stuff that happened to her before she met McCarthy and while she was struggling with her struggles with mental health ended up in those books in a very direct way, apparently. And that makes reading those parts different now that I know where they're coming from. And that I think is something I will have to figure out how to deal with that. Because yeah, what can I do? Right? I mean, I can't change how that happened, but it'll certainly impact my feeling if I ever try to reread Stella Maris. That will certainly very much impact how I experience that and how I read that, and that's certainly frustrating because in that regard, it has certainly changed and probably very much damaged and worsened my ability to appreciate the text, I guess. Anyway, we've been talking way too long. Let's try to actually do some more productivity stuff, and I'll be back in. Let's try 20 past or slightly after that, so I can then run and get a bus to the gym, which is kind of the goal, right? So let's do that, and I'll talk to you in something like 40-ish minutes. All right, we are back, sort of. I am, at least. And hello, Chadia. Good morning, and I hope you too have a good day. I'm having a day, which is already something, I guess. Hey, Bertie. First of all, hello, and good question there. I would have to think hard about that because yeah, as I said, it kind of depends on what kind of fantasy you're writing. Um, I guess the question is like, are you talking about like a perspective of someone who has passed away, or are you talking about general sort of like thoughts on like how people think about what will happen afterwards? The other part is, of course, do people know, or do people just have opinions on that? Because obviously, with both Lord of the Rings and Malazan, you have the fact that you know people know what happens to people when they die in Malazan because you can conjure spirits, you can do the whole stuff, talk to Hood's realm, go there even if you feel like it, and that does give certainty in a way that we certainly do not have in our world here. And the same with Lord of the Rings. Obviously, everyone kind of assumes they know how stuff works. Obviously, the elves do know how stuff works because they have hung out in Valinor and stuff like that. They talk to or have talked to Valar in the past, and I assume they have told humans. So you have a level of certainty there that does make dealing with death different from, say, places where you don't necessarily know exactly what happens after death, but you have different theories and hopes and beliefs. So that's probably the first thing you need to figure out, whether you're stating facts or whether you're stating beliefs. And after that, that's a good question. How to do that afterwards. I think I get the way I would say I would tackle this, or where I think importance comes in is, or where stuff gets important is how to sort of attach a level of sincerity to death in whatever form it happens. So if there is like a soul or whatever, something that goes on after passing, then that has to be treated with sincerity. Then you obviously have the idea of like rituals about dead bodies, which burial rituals, which you can use a lot of stuff if you want to, and make it bombastic. Have your Viking funeral stuff go, for example, right? And then you need to figure out how to deal with the other part. I would say like sincerity is the most important thing here because it is certainly something that we all struggle with in our world here, and fantasy offers us certainly views of like perspectives to deal with that. So I feel like a form of like respect or sincerity might be interesting, or might be the approach there. I mean, I assume that's what you're going for if you mentioned the Gift of Men from Lord of the Rings and Malazan. I assume you're not writing a comedy where you can have like all kinds of other fun stuff going on, but that's a different story. Um, so I guess it's sort of like how I would tackle it is like figure out how's death happening in this world. Do people know what happens after death, or do people suspect and hope? That's like the first question I would ask, and then look at like what you're writing about. Are you writing stuff about souls in the afterlife? Is that a perspective you're looking at? Um, I mean, or is it something else? I mean, that's usually like the main stuff, and then you can just figure it out from there. Because there's a difference if you're doing world building, or if you're writing theology. That's I guess the main part there for me, at least. Oh, and hello, Apollo. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think that the main thing there is that Jameson does obviously also look at these ideas, right? He's a Marxist critic and philosopher, and he does look at those ideas obviously as well, like Adorno and so forth. I think he's mostly talking, at least in the opening essays, he's talking about like the form of utopian literature in the past and what it tries to do, because obviously the idea is there that you satirize the present in hopes to engender change. And that's certainly something you can see with people, with Bacon or more and some other older ones where you have like a utopia that just does sort of like showcase, or it's a good tool, I guess, in exposing the more like ridiculous aspects of the society it's satirizing. But what it does, and I think that's where you can connect the two, is that any form of utopia is showcasing an alternative, is showcasing a different place. It's opening up our mental horizon so we can imagine other better futures. And that is already like an important aspect, because we have to imagine a better future before we can build it. Because one thing that is sort of troubling with, like, say, dystopian topics is that they just showcase where shit is going if we continue the road that we're on, or if one specific aspect of the world that we're living in gets even more enhanced and so forth. And that is, they're like a word of warning, but they don't necessarily open up new vistas of imagination. And that's the same thing you have with a lot of like sci-fi. A lot of sci-fi at this point has certainly lost the ability to imagine something else than capitalism, for example, as the structuring, sort of like underlying structure of the future world. Like Star Trek and Ian M. Banks obviously are some of the few big sort of like sci-fi worlds in a lot of cases, the culture, that are explicitly non-capitalist. And you can probably quibble about parts of Star Trek in that regard, but they at least showcase something different. Whereas other big sci-fi ideas, they still run under capitalism, and it's just like assumed as a baseline in a lot of ways, and that's already dangerous. So having utopias as an idea to sort of like open up vistas for different imaginations is an important part, I think. And you can either do that by just laying out how the world could be great, or by going look at like how ridiculous the places that we're in. And that's a different thing from doing a dystopia where you paint it in like more warning and darker tones. And I feel like humor is obviously a very powerful tool in questioning the present, I think. But I don't disagree with your definition of utopia. I think it's more that Jameson, in that specific work, is looking at a different sort of like historical tradition of science fiction and utopias, I guess. All right, guys. It is almost 10:30, and if I want to catch the bus, I need to speedily pack my shit and go down into town. Thanks for hanging out. I do very much appreciate that. As always, I'll try to be back on Monday, and we'll see if it fails again. Then I'm pretty sure it is that Restream does actually hate Mondays, which is, understandable, but still annoying. And yeah, tomorrow will be the usual monthly live stream in the evening that I do. Will be probably more people. It'll be more rowdy, no sprints, just talking about stuff that came up. I'm pretty sure the McCarthy shit will come up again. Probably a few other elements. So we'll see how that goes. In case anyone has, nothing better to do. And yeah, no worries, Apollo. I mean, it's a broad topic, and you can have both definitions depending on what you talk about, and that's usually where definitions and context matter when we use words that have specific meanings, I guess, where we can't assume that everyone has the same definition. So yeah. Anyway, maybe I'll see some of you tomorrow at the live stream. Maybe I'll manage to record another video before the week is over. Who knows? It's a world of possibilities. And isn't that brilliant? So yeah, have a good Friday, and have a good weekend in case you are, actually having a weekend.